Namaste and welcome to the 10 p.m. Wednesday show. And today we are going to talk about something which is quite deep and also requires everybody's attention. And I have with me Sankrant Sanu and Shri Vibhuti Jha as usual, and Pandit Satish Sharma is going to join us, and we are going to talk about how to get a fix on the Sanatana civilization, or rather, as people keep saying that okay, that we need to fix this Sanatan civilization. So how do we fix it? And that started by a conversation between me and Sankrant on Twitter. I think I take it to Sankrant straight away because it was his tweet that started the process. So Sankrant, over to you.
Well, I think the question how to fix it is a very big one, but I think the specific tweet how to fix Sanatan civilization has many parts. But I think the specific tweet you are referring to is more about how to address the issue of
I think it was more about how not to fix it.
yes, that's true. I mean, how to address the issue of violent Abrahamic um, systems that are in India and who have an agenda to convert India to the violent Abrahamic ideology. So really, the question is if we think that we are just going to police can fix it, as as you said in the tweet, police can fix it or FIRs can fix it. This is a big misconstrual misunderstanding, because all of this actually begins with a war of narrative. It is people's, somebody had put up just a few generations back, Farooq Abdullah's family was Hindu. Just a few generations back, Asaduddin Owaisi's family was Hindu, right? So once, what Ambedkar had said, that once you have this conversion happen, you start to create an enemy for the civilization once this conversion happen. So it's really about how do we reinvigorate this stream of civilization. And you have to start the people, one in one sense, of course, by the sword. I mean, the Abrahamic systems that invaded India, one by the sword. But ultimately today they have captured people's minds. Whether they have captured people's mind through repeat indoctrination that happens every week. I always say falsehood requires repeated indoctrination. That is why there is a weekly meeting where you re-indoctrinate people into falsehood. But truth doesn't need that. But at the same time, we have let it pass. We have not really taken the fight, in the sense, the intellectual fight, into the other camp. We have not said, okay, these ideologies are not on line with humanity. These ideologies are not in line with truth. This is our long tradition in India of debate. And we say, okay, we are going to challenge what your claim is. We are going to challenge your claim of Jannat, that you're going to get X, Y, and Z. You get rivers of wine flowing in Jannat after you are prohibited to drink wine here. What kind of God is this? So we haven't really taken that fight, that narrative fight. And so the only solution in some senses is to say, let us have that debate, and we need to have a policy. Unfortunately, we don't have a Hindu friendly state. In fact, we have an anti-Hindu state, and I've written about this extensively. The biggest irony is that the Indian state funds conversion out of Hinduism. The Indian state should be the representative of the Hindu civilization across the world. All these, they have more than 100 countries that are Christian majority. There are nearly 50 countries which are Muslim majority, and they all vociferously speak for those religions. But we have a tweet from Shashi Tharoor saying, why is Prime Minister Modi also not speaking about Islamophobia? Well, shouldn't at least there be some country which is speaking about Hindu phobia? Shouldn't there at least be some country which is representing the indigenous Hindu civilization? Shouldn't there be some state which is representing the Hindu civilization? So this is where the problem really begins, that we have been pawned, we have been scammed. And how have we been scammed? That the only country that actually should be speaking out for Hindus and actually we create running scheme for Hindus, actually be taking forward the Hindu narrative, has been scammed into also supporting the two most powerful dominant religions of the world, the most highly funded religions of the world, by creating schemes, by creating scholarships, by creating incentives to convert Hindus out of their own tradition into these two major dominant groupings. And again, double ironically, in the name of minorities, these are global dominant forces. The seculars do not support them because they are quote minorities, they support them because they are globally dominant and highly funded. Seculars are not running around getting very upset because the Supreme Court ruled against Jains. They couldn't care less, right? They stand for these two forces because they are globally dominant and very powerful, and that's where their bread gets buttered. So we have to completely do away with this term of minority in reference to these two religions in India. It makes no sense whatsoever, and the state needs to have a policy saying, and there is other states where they have Bhumiputra policy, or other policies where they're saying that the Indian state will represent the Hindu civilization. This is our ancient civilization, and we stand for the Hindu civilization, and we will do everything to align the people of India with the values of the Hindu civilization, which includes pluralism and open debate about all of these religious ideas, and also have a policy to bring the people back into the fold. This is very, very important. This is, if you look at what Spain did in the Reconquista, for instance, in after the Reconquista, Spain basically took back everything that had been lost in the invasions. So I'm not saying we have to follow the Spanish model, but at least as a policy and as an intellectual platform, we should say, okay, how do we actually get the people who have gone out of the fold some only a few generations back, and have a policy to bring them back and reconnect them to the Sanatan civilization.
We go straight to Panditji, and can we just test your sound?
Pranam ji, Namaskar, Jai Shri Ram. Is that coming through to you?
It is still quite better than better than what we heard,
Okay,
but
give me a
not to it.
Please continue.
Yeah, much better now. Okay.
It's better now, is it?
Oh, yeah, better. We can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, Jai Shri Ram, and thank you very much for hosting this session. And Sankrant ji, Vibhuti ji, Pranam, Namaskar, Sanjay ji, always a pleasure to be with you. This is such an important subject for us to speak about. And you'll be surprised to hear that this is exactly the topic that I spoke upon only last week when our dear Vivek Agnihotri ji was here with his The Kashmir Files roadshow. And I think this is going to be the topic for many, many sessions with us. One thing that I've decided to rely on, shall we say, and be guided is our ancient teachings. They can always be relied upon to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what's really underneath the hood. And when I looked at this conversation about civilizations, about religious extremism, and so on, if you dig down into the tattva and remove all of the religious mumbo jumbo that floats around, move all of the economic conversations about capitalism and free markets and Marxism, you come to a basic understanding that we're dealing with the most rudimentary of tribal cultures. And for them, it's really very simple. And for them, it's about either enslave or be enslaved. They have never really tolerated freedom of thought, have they? There have always been societies which either were slaves or enslaved. And they've been doing this for the best part of 2,000 years. So we need to recognize that rather than looking at the period of 1400 years of rule, which is a word which has all sorts of nice connotations, if we look at it as 1400 years of slavery, where essentially the fruit of our labors and the benefits of our generations which preceded us were denied to us. Isn't that what slavery is? And there is every intention to enslave Bharat, and it's not just the Middle Eastern Islamist tribes, it's also the Euro Christian tribes. They enslaved all of Europe, didn't they? And to a large degree, many Europeans are still enslaved without even knowing that they're enslaved. And I think it was von Goethe who said, "None are so enslaved as those who falsely believe themselves to be free." And so, if you can enslave a civilization in their early formative years, they will never realize that they're enslaved. And conversion is actually nothing other than a mechanism for intellectual and emotional enslavement, separation from one's ancestors, and then the bishops and those who are the shall we say, the custodians of the technology used to enslave, they derive a very wonderful and fulfilled life and existence, and their institutions persist generation to generation. But we need to approach this as a rejection of slavery. They have every intention of enslaving us. I put out a tweet the other day that what everybody else wants is Hindus without their Hinduism and Hinduism without the Hindus. So this is we're both resources. Hindus are resources. Hinduism is a resource. Our Dharma Vidya and every other Vidya is a resource. They want both of those, but not in an integrated fashion. And I think if we start to see it in that manner, we'll develop the language and the thoughts to reject it in that manner.
So, Vibhuti Ji, do you have a take on this, or you want to ask something?
Yeah, I will. I will definitely want to ask something. Is it both the learned people here, Satish ji and Sankrant ji, it's always good to ask a question. That's the freedom of speech, for my definition, is to make an inquiry, to learn. That's where change happens. That's where transformation happens. That's where innovations and discoveries happen. That's true freedom of speech. So in that spirit, I would reach out to both of you and you can pick it out. One of the things we must lay down very clearly is the understanding of Sanatan itself. It is the people talk about discrimination throughout. Every democracy is fighting battle of discrimination. We must not discriminate. In the process, we end up creating individual identity politics. But Sanatan is a non-discriminatory belief system in the world, is the only one. It is gender neutral, it is color neutral, and it is religion neutral. It applies to everybody. It's time for us to take that message forward to the Western world. Because what we are witnessing at this point in time is a cultural invasion, cultural destruction of existing societies. So look at, Sarmaji, the European football for that matter. The entire leagues of French, German, English leagues, they have been bought over by Etihad, Qatar Airways, Emirat Airways, and what have you. So much so that in the Real Madrid, when they put $2 billion of Qatari money in it, they asked Real Madrid to remove the cross from their insignia, and they did. That means money talks and culture is for sale. That's where we stand out. People always blame us that our belief system is like this or like that, but people forget we are the only belief system where we have acknowledged Shakti as the way it is. Your thoughts on how do we take this message forward instead of being accused of varieties of nonsense about with treatment of women in India? Forget about the aberrations that happen. There are evil people who will do silly things. But what exists within our faith is the Nari Shakti, the Shakti embodiment of Shakti in women as part of an equal Ardhanarishwar, or call it any other way. How do we take that message forward? Because in my opinion, I believe right now that the civilizational struggle is about the battle between the forces of subjugation and humiliation versus freedom and redemption. We need to get into that very seriously, both of you.
Was that a
Wonderful.
question, sir?
Well, I
Very
think so.
wonderful. How do we do it?
Yeah. Well, I think there is an approach that we can adopt which is entirely dharmic. And that approach is one, life is good. The human being is an intrinsically good creation. And that when a human being appears in this intrinsically good earth, only good things will naturally occur. Right? We don't have this notion that the human being comes into this earth as something to be fixed and that somebody has got the solution to fixing it. You know, the moment you want to create demand, you have to create a problem, don't you? And you can't corner a market without providing a product, and that requires demand. And what better demand than to say the human being is somehow incomplete and needs to be fixed, and we've got the clue to it. Our tradition says that the human being is intrinsically good, and all we need to do is to learn how to navigate this earth with happiness and with anand, and then learn how to sit still. That's all that's required of us, complete stillness. And when we sit in a complete still moment, our consciousness enters backwards. It falls into itself, and suddenly you realize what divinity is. Now, we are the only tradition which says that a human being can experience that without an intermediary. That if a person behaves in a completely natural way and seeks the benefit of all of life, then this body is programmed to take us on a spiritual journey. And so we have this capacity to be able to offer something, a view, which undermines all of these theocracies, all of these clerics, all of these institutions which say, no, no, God has created you incomplete, and we have got the agency, we have got the visa to fix you guys and then move you on. Now we can actually undermine all of these philosophies by pushing the idea that actually look at yourself, look at the way in which you arrived here. When you opened your eyes here, right, you had everything that you needed to complete this journey. And if somebody hadn't filled your head with these thoughts of identities, these ancient hatred, these ancient squabbles, these ancient disputes between members of the family, if somebody hadn't filled your head with those when you were vulnerable, you wouldn't have any clue about them. You know, Sanjayji, there is no creature on earth which needs to refer to a body of knowledge from its ancestors in order to live a fulfilled life. Every other animal is, it opens its eyes and it navigates on the teachings its parent gives it. That's all that's needed. So we have an entirely natural way and a fulfilling way and a holistic way and a complete way of moving through this journey. If we start to tell people that this is how they came here, their original Garvapasi is actually to go back to the moment before they were baptized or before they read some words from some book and then suddenly became less than complete members of the whole human family. We can take them back to that moment, the way they arrived here. And I think slowly they will start to discover that perhaps they have been hacked, that they have been enslaved, and that their life has actually been taken over by somebody else for somebody else's benefit. I'm saddened when I see so many young Kashmiri Muslim youth throwing stones, being attacked, being arrested. They have no idea that their whole existence has actually been taken over by somebody else. And usually that somebody else's children are studying in the West or in America or somewhere like that. And it's such a tragedy. We can actually undo this. I think we can. And then we will have more people than ever before abandoning blind belief systems and reverting back to an experience-based existence. And that, I think, is a brilliant gift that we have to give.
Quite right. I think Sankrant can just take it forward because there does seem to be, at least in the West and increasingly now in India also, uh, movement away from Islam from within. And do you think it's going to help and how we can accelerate and actually pass on the message? I think for too long, Sanatan has been what we call uh, non-expansionist. I think it's time that we also put in an expansionist idea because a defensive war can never be won. You can only
Absolutely.
keep defending for so long, but ultimately one breach and the defense is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to look at there, Sanjay ji. One is that what is the mechanisms by which people have come to wake up to the Abrahamic kind of prison of the mind. And I have been very, very interested in this topic, and I have, mostly from the point of view of Christianity, I have talked to a lot of people who left Christianity. I interviewed them also. I video recordings, many, many things. I was very curious to answer this question in the US, for instance. What is it that made you leave? There's this one girl I really remember. She was actually born in Israel. She belonged to this very fundamental sect called Jews for Jesus, and she lived on this commune of Jews for Jesus, and they regarded all the other Jews who were not converted to Christianity, who had not accepted Jesus, as going to hell. And and this is of course true of all Abrahamisms. I have this theory of totalitarianism. When totalitarianism schisms, then each schism is also a totalitarianism, and therefore each schism regards the other as going to hell, just like Shia and Sunni, and it's infinitely divisible. So the more you create, each one of those sects will say every other sect is going to hell. Of course, everybody outside the fold is going to hell anyways. So this idea itself, and when I started talking to her, she did get introduced to yogic ideas later on and many other things, but the fundamental disconnect that happened for her was that she was being taught at home and at church that the children in the playground she's playing with are all going to hell except for her, or except for people who are belonging to that particular cult. So all our Jewish friends were going to hell. And this started to create a sliver in her mind slowly and slowly that said, well, there is something wrong with this picture. What's wrong with this picture? And that sliver started becoming bigger and bigger. She started exploring other ideas and came to the point of rejecting her whole church. Of course, that is never easy because her family, her church excommunicated her, her family disowned her. So there is this entire social structure. And the same thing happens in Islam as well. If you go towards the journey to become an ex-Muslim, you have to hide it for a long time. And if you will come out, then your family will disown you. You know, based on where you are, you might be harassed or violently attacked or even killed. Forget any other country. In India, in Gujarat, recently a young Muslim boy who spoke up against this fundamentalist is like, what wrong did Nupur Sharma say? She's quoting from a text. Why are we violently in agitation about this? And of course more violent agitation started, and he was arrested by the Indian state for just speaking a simple
Yeah,
truth.
it was in Bombay, actually.
Yeah,
Mumbai.
in Bombay, or yeah. So the coming back to it, the idea that we have. So what is it that starts to unhook people's mind from this dogma? They have a whole bunch of fields of study. They are theological colleges in Christianity that study apologetics, that study polemics, that are looking at what are all of apologetics is the study of how do you defend against attacks. Polemics is the study of how do you find arguments in other people's religions. This is a serious field of study in Christianity and Islam because of the way they go about doing their things. Because we are existing in a world dominated by these two, we will need to create parallels to this. We will need to say, okay, what is our in fact, we don't even need to create polemics because we really have the beauty of Sanatan, as Satishji pointed out, where we go and we say these are all the flaws in the argument. This doesn't make any sense. Your notion of eternal hell, eternal heaven is absurd. It makes no sense whatsoever, right? So we have to go and systematically demolish this system. There are all these attacks against Murti Puja, for instance, completely delusional attacks. They make no sense whatsoever, right? So we need to have that firstly come from scholarship, and then and we cannot just keep saying stupid things like everybody is the same, everything is the same. Well, if everything is the same, then where's the conflict? The conflict is because there are two major religions of the world that not only don't regard everything as the same, but they regard everything else as evil. Everything else is bound for hell, and they are duty bound. It's their moral duty to convert other people because they want to save them from hell. So if you really believe that not following a particular book is going to take you to hell, uh, then you would find it a moral duty for you to convert other people into that belief system. You're trying to save them from hell. You're doing something good, right? So we really have to go to the root of this, and we have to create the all of the material, whether it's going through books and scholarship, whether it's going through YouTube videos, whether it's going to public dialogues. We have to, and we have the strongest counter arguments here, because the entire structure is actually based on what is real. The entire Sanatan tradition is the quest for the real, right? There are three questions, or four questions, that are very central to our tradition, which is, firstly, what is real, right? How do I distinguish between what is real and what is unreal? And all of the debates are just different nuances and arguments and direct perceptions of how do you get there. And then, how can I be happy? What is it, being happy? Even a creature in the forest wants to be happy. It's a fundamental to every living creature. And in fact, the American founding principle is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So that notion of happiness is embedded in all of the all of the human uh, strivings, in a way. So we bring reality is central, happiness is central, and the notion of consciousness is central. Consciousness, how do I become aware? We have a lot of this talk about mindfulness, so on and so forth. Again, some stolen ideas they take and they make it into a big thing, but the entire tradition is about how do I become more conscious, more aware in the moment. A lot of the things around, when we talk about environment, all of these things just fall out of sarve bhavantu sukhina, let all beings be happy, right? And that comes from this increased consciousness. So if you take those three terms, what is that? One is reality, which is sat. There is consciousness, which is chit, and which is the third is happiness, which is anand. So sachidanand, this is God. So it's very, very simple. We bring people back to the fundamental human quest that every human being is on. And what has happened is that this blindness of orthodoxy, this blindness of dogma that Abrahamism has cast in their eyes, and that's what I said. The falsehood requires repeated indoctrination. That's why there's Sunday school. You need to constantly. The truth stands on its own. It doesn't even matter. You're in a forest and you can discover it by yourself. It doesn't need indoctrination to find out the truth. But to continue to believe falsehood requires repeated indoctrination. And this is why Friday prayers happen. This is why once they come out of the Friday prayers, then they start pelting stones, because they have been suddenly charged up by this fervor of propagating what is really a mind control system. It's a way to control the mind, so that the mind is unable to question, it is unable to look at reality as it is. You have to give away the authority of your own direct perception of reality to some commandment, to some God, to some prophet that came some time ago. So we really need to bring it back to wake up, look at the world as it is, look at the world as it exists. And for this, it's very important that, it's a little dangerous slope we are following in India right now, where we are doing competitive outrage, right? So because they outrage over X, Y, and Z, somebody said something about a prophet. Now we are outraging because somebody said something about Ram or something like that. So we are in this competitive outrage model. The problem with the competitive outrage model is we will ultimately lose in competitive outrage, because our tradition is not based on outrage. Our tradition is based on truth. So I would much rather have I don't care if somebody wants to criticize my code God or anything, as long as I also have the protection to criticize theirs. I actually want the level playing field where I can go into a debate and the state is there to protect me rather than the state is there to suppress everybody else's way of speaking about it, including my own, right? So from a Sanatan point of view, I think it's a dangerous slope to go on where speech becomes more and more restricted. And we have a whole bunch of laws in India, unfortunately, that have created this where you say, okay, anything which disturbs communal harmony is going to be shut down. Well, that means that the more ability you have to disturb communal harmony, the more ability you get to shut down speech, right? And the state will be favoring you because you have a great ability to disturb communal harmony. And the only way to get the state to listen is for you to be rioting and to be throwing stones, because unless you can also riot and throw stones, communal harmony is not disturbed, and therefore the state will do nothing, right? So the whole this whole set of principles that are around complete restriction of speech and debate and disturbed sentiments, we have to start to question it, because the Sanatan flourishes in light. We want to bring, and all the creatures of the dark are going to scurry away the more light we can bring on it. So we are not afraid of the light. Let there be light. Let there be lots of light. And this is why this whole thing that happened with Nupur Sharma is so unfortunate. I mean, she's being lynched for saying something which is from their own text. She's not making it up. She's not even lying. She's just repeated what is there in Sahih Hadith, which is graded Sahih, which is graded accurate. And there are so few people. The government is not standing for her. Her party is not standing up for her. Right? She's been thrown to the mob, and this is the way where we lower the standard of debate in India. We get into a lower and lower thing. You cannot say anything about anybody, right? And this is exactly the climate the church wanted, because you can't question anything. This is the climate the mullahs want, because you cannot question what is taught in the Friday sermon. And that's what we need to get away from, to get back into recreating real debate, to help free the people whose minds have been. I mean, people, it's funny. Some years ago, some of my IT friends started calling me a born again Hindu. It's like, what happened to this guy? You know, because this guy is a chill dude, and he's doing all this, and what has happened? And for me, it's actually, I came from this notion of actually deep compassion. It's rather than just look at the people who are enslaved as an enemy, which actually I never do. There is a deep compassion for people everywhere in the world, actually, not only in India, everywhere in the world, who have been, their minds have been shrunk and their spirit has been shrunk by these ideologies. And that's why I made it a quest to go talk to the people who are freed from it, a lot of them through yoga and other things. I remember I had a woman in Seattle who was very close. Well, in fact, I was in a long relationship with her, and she grew up Mormon. And Mormonism is a sect of Christianity which is again very, very fundamentalist. And she was she went to seminary every morning at 5 a.m. So what she said was, she was a birth doula who was attending births, and she said during the process of attending births, it struck her that she felt a divine presence no matter whose birth it was. And it struck her that God was not Mormon. And this was a huge shaking of her world, that God was not Mormon, because she always believed God was Mormon, right? So reality is our biggest ally. Reality is our biggest ally, because I mean, we don't even, it took me years after being in America to realize that people actually believed I was going to hell. I mean, it was such an absurd idea to me. And when somebody said that to me, I actually burst out laughing. I was like, oh, you actually believe this stuff? Because it's so absurd for us. It makes no sense whatsoever, right? So the more we can bring people to reality, and the more we see it as a mission, not to say, not to create an other, not to look at it as an enemy, but to say it is our duty as somebody who has been gifted by understanding of the Sanatan tradition, to help free people's minds who are stuck in dogma, who are stuck in this place. And I think if we look at that and encourage an intellectual movement, encourage, and of course it has to happen in many levels. There's an intellectual movement, but we have to change the Indian state from being an anti-Hindu state as well. And we have to be very clear that that's an objective. Right now, the Indian state is an anti-Hindu state. I had written this article in Rediff a few years ago. Uh, how I call it constitutional apartheid. There is this notion of constitutional apartheid where in the world does a minority have a higher claim to resources than a majority? In apartheid era South Africa, where a minority is ruling and the minority has higher the first claim on resources over the majority of people, right? And this through some absurdity of what happened in 1947 and 1950 in the framing of the constitution, and then again how it was interpreted later on. I don't even think in the framing of the constitution, if you read the debates, they were intending minorities to have greater rights than the majority. But this is how it came up, and now we have a Modi government creating schemes of thousands and thousands of um, scholarships and schemes and things where you're checked your religion. The state checks your religious identity. If you're a Hindu, you are not entitled to get benefits. If you're not a Hindu, then you are entitled to get all this long list of benefits by the state. Now they are even starting special schools like where they are going to check if you're only going to admitted into this college if you're not a Hindu, and so on and so forth. And
No. That's old news.
secularism.
That's old
What?
news.
Yeah. There was
That was the old guy.
I don't know if they went through with that or not,
No,
but
no. That was a 3-year-old announcement by that erstwhile chairman.
yes,
Coming through.
yeah. So, but what I'm saying is
Already.
that it's still, I mean, the absurdity that people would be thinking about this in such a way that the state should create schools where everybody is allowed except Hindus is, I mean, that's the
I think
kind of
I'll have to interrupt you, Sankrant. I think
yeah,
we have to go to
yes,
Panditji now. And before I go to him, I have to request my viewers for questions and also to request them to subscribe to the Jaipur Dialogue Vimersh channel, where we are posting talks and videos. Then you can ask questions on WhatsApp and Super Chat both. Now, taking off from Sankrant, I go to Panditji and I ask him that we're talking about uh, going from unreal to real. Uh, the problem occurs is that in this culture of debate, in this quest for the real, within the Sanatana, we have so many different viewpoints that it becomes difficult to reconcile them. And then you have the Murti Pujaks who are being derided by the Arya Samajis, or you have the Dvait and Advait. And so, can we find a modus vivendi for all? That's okay. These are the things that are absolutely common to everybody. And then we
Wonderful.
focus on that.
What a wonderful question. Can I just pick up 2 points that Sankrantji made, which I think are quite important to mention before I turn to your question? The first is that something happened after Nupur Sharmaji made her remarks. And that is, we have now got a clear understanding that a minority is not necessarily beneficial just by virtue of the fact that it's a minority. I'd go as far as to say that the world is now opening its eyes to the fact that there are some toxic minorities, that there are minorities that are so toxic that they are destructive of civilizational values. Here in the United Kingdom, there is a film called The Lady of Heaven, which is made by a Shia community, and there's nothing offensive in it. But the cinemas which were showing this movie were mobbed by very aggressive men who were demanding that they not show this movie. And eventually, for the safety of the cinema staff, the cinemas themselves decided to stop that movie. So it was cancelled. So this is, if you think about what that actually means, that means that with one action, all of the laws that we have developed over a long period of time about freedom of speech, freedom of artistic expression, respecting contractual agreements. You know, there were contracts entered into by the cinema and the filmmakers, the ticket buyers who wanted to go and see these movies. So many agreements, so many standards being accepted as a society, all of them suddenly shut down by an aggressive, toxic minority. That was here in the United Kingdom. Obviously, we have seen the same phenomenon, i.e., abandon law, abandon friendships, abandon international relationships, abandon diplomacy, all of those things that have been developed over a long period of time, just because a mob decides to act because it's offended. Now, this notion that being offended gives you the right to abandon every civilizational tenet and every law, this must be challenged. If it's not challenged, then there is no law. Then there is complete Jungle Raj, Gunda Raj, and Jiski Lathi Bhain Susiki. And that is not civilization. So we are at that point where those who have been given the authority to protect civil people, law-abiding people, people who are investing and contributing to society and national well-being, they must be protected from toxic minorities who are determined to pay no heed to legislation. If this is not addressed, just think what it means. It means that the United Nations has no value. It means that the European Parliament has no value. It means that parliamentarians, MPs, lawmakers, legislators, the courts, the judiciary have no value, because actions are being determined on the basis of aggression and on the basis of justification because I was offended. This is completely the end of an era if this isn't met. And I think what I'm seeing is so many people are beginning to recognize that this is where we are. And that's a great development, I think. I think once more and more people realize the reality, the satya of the place where we're standing, the more people will come together and say, no, this cannot pass. And this idea that diversity is a good thing, it doesn't withstand scrutiny if your principle is that aggression can happily erase all diversity. There is nowhere to go. We have nobody who can pretend this is not happening. There is no one who can say, well, I'll deal with it. It's not my problem. I'll deal with it when it becomes my problem. It is everybody's problem. It is present. It is in front of us. And that really does need to be dealt with. Now, Sanjayji, what you said about common platforms, you know, we have a beautiful system. It's called the Guru Shishya Parampara. The purpose of the Guru was to look at the potential Shishya or anybody and say, for this person, at this stage in their life, this is the body of learning and the practices they need to do. And if you think about how varied human beings are, it's an unbelievably subtle system to make sure that if somebody is not intellectual, but they have a great deal of devotion and a natural belief, then it's the wrong thing to give them the Ashtavakra Gita and say, memorize this. All right? If somebody is of that way, then what you want to do is to help them train their bhavna, help them expand their heart and their compassion. And so you give them murti puja. You give them a vigraha which encapsulates the symbols and which triggers their heart. And so that's why we have something specific. The tragedy, I think, at this time is that we have too many cross links. We have too many gyanis who should be doing murti puja. And we have too many people who are bhagts and they're reading the wrong text. And so we have a complete confusion. But even that is not disaster, because the human form is built to move forward and to evolve. If something causes it a problem, it experiences tension and resistance internally. And so it will push harder to find the solution to that problem. And somewhere or other, so long as sadhana and determination continues, what happens, as they say, when a student is ready, a teacher is provided. And I have seen this even sitting here on the cold north-western corner of the very hard, rugged continent of Europe. Teachers are even provided here if the student is ready. So it's we need to get a little bit of clarity on what we need to do. But the commonality is the belief that human beings are a great creation, 8.4 million births to acquire a human form. This is a sadhana of many lifetimes. And so everybody who has acquired that human form, we give them the respect. If you think about our paramparas, they are not toxic minorities. Our paramparas have no toxicity in them, which is why they coexist so well. But we have two paramparas which are actually very toxic, and they're both alien to Sanatan Dharma because they're irrational and they're adolescent in their understanding, and they're very aggressive. So once we work out how to deal with these toxic paramparas, then I think a great deal of tranquility and a great deal of suffering would disappear.
That doesn't answer my core question.
We'll
The
keep it for the
human
next
being.
time.
No, no, no.
Well,
Okay, let me propose something.
I didn't want to
Let,
monopolize it, but like
let
I
me
said,
propose.
one thing
Let,
is that
let
for
me
us, a good human being.
one minute, Pandit, one
And,
minute. Let me propose something. That's why both you and Sankrant to consider uh, that. Okay, I don't know whether you read my little booklet called "All Religions Are Not the Same," where I have differentiated between the Abrahamic religions and our religion, the essence of our dharma on six counts. But let me just put it this way: Can we say, can we say that there are at least 4 points that are common to all Sanatani denominations, and that is dharma, karma, sansar, and moksha. Of course, they can all differ in their little nuances. All sampradayas, all different denominations can differ, say, even on the definition of moksha or definition of dharma. But these four essentials, can we say that these four essentials characterize every Sanatana sampradaya or every Sanatana denomination? Can we?
Sankrantji, would you like to lead?
Yes, sure. I think we can do it uh, both, in the four purusharthas, or we can also do it in that other framework about what are the central questions of debate, right? The one distinguishing, people say, even Hindus say, oh, these are all paths to the same goal, and they include Islam and Christianity in that, but we don't even have the same goal. So how can there be paths to the same goal if we don't even agree on the goal? So the main difference in all of the Indic tradition, and I would include not only Sanatan traditions, but Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, all of these traditions, is that there is actually a set of common questions. Now the answer to those common questions may have different nuances, right? But the questions are the questions that I had spoken about earlier, which is, what is real, how can I be happy, how can I be happy for a long time rather than a short time, what is, you know shreyas and prayas. All of these questions are the questions that are driving us, which is, it is a quest for reality, it is a quest for what is real, right? It is not a quest for heaven, it is not a question for escaping into this state of, that is why the whole this thing, does God exist, is a stupid question in our traditions, because we are saying everything that exists is Brahman, right? If you say everything that exists is Brahman, what does it even mean to ask that question? It doesn't mean anything. It's only when you have created this supernatural entity outside of creation, which is transcendent only, and then you're stuck with these questions: does this supernatural entity exist or not exist? But what our so coming back to Sanjay's point, the four purusharthas, definitely the four strivings, and Satchidanand, you know truth, consciousness, bliss,
Oh,
reality.
you're missing something. You're missing
Yeah.
sansara, and sansara is the cyclical time, this
Yes.
that goes round, and without the cyclical time, you cannot define the Sanatana Dharma. That is my
Yeah,
very, very
yeah. I
fundamental
mean,
point.
I think we can definitely add a set. The way I would say is in response to the question earlier, which was, there are all these sects that are disputing. I've come back to that they are disputing on a common thing, right? So coming back to this idea, what is the actual dispute about? Because we are not even in fact, Arvind Sharma and other scholars of religion have said that before, which is we are actually not even on. There is no dialogue, in fact, between Hindu tradition and Islam or Christianity, for that matter, because there is the ground of the dispute is not even common, right? We cannot all of the Indian traditions are disputing about a common set of questions which they have different takes on, right? So defining that set of questions, I think, is the and samsara, definitely, what is the relationship between purusha and prakriti, what is this nature of samsara, all of this can be part of that set of questions. But I think we get to common ground by saying, okay, these are the common set of questions. There are human questions at the end of it. There are human questions for all human beings on the planet to understand. And I think that is the way forward, at least from a uniting point of view.
Panditji.
Gee, if I can add one other thing, and that is an analogy. Sometimes I feel as though I'm in a conversation with one group who are supporting the idea that the earth is flat, and another group who are supporting the idea that the earth is cuboid. And neither of them will get out their measurements and their equipment and actually go and do some empirical analysis and empirical measurements. What Sankrantji has said about reality is, I think, the foundation of all of our traditions. And that's the difference. We're not imprisoned in a model that we have to stay in that model. We keep batting our capacity for reason against walls and becoming bruised intellectually, but we have to stay in that model. And it's exactly the same as this conference that I've alluded to. Unless you abandon the principles which determine that the earth is flat, you can't then explore. And the other thing is that all of our traditions have at their center each of us. One of the things that all human beings are occasionally curious about is these things called horoscopes. Why? Because we have a sense of a mystery. What are we here for? What are we? What's going to happen to us? What can we do about it, etc.? We're at the center of our universe. And all of our traditions and the gurus who guided us, they sat still and found out what it was at the center of each of our universes. And in that, we are exactly the same as all of our traditions.
Right.
If I
We'll
may.
take a final word from Vibhuti Ji
Oh,
before we
thank you, thank you. No, you are.
go into
We have
questions.
really been very clear with the purpose, objective, and mission, and everything else is great. The question comes back to the same thing, that for us to attain redemption and freedom, we have to resist subjugation and humiliation. That's very important. But as in every problem, there is always a start point. You got to pick your battle. And in my thought, and this is a question to both of you, to your thoughts on it. Conversion, we all address that issue. Both of you talked about conversion. Should Sanatanis, who are totally non-discriminatory, insist that conversion is a sin against God's original intent? How do we make that argument? Because that is one which will shake the whole thing, a beginning point for everything, that as humans, we are proven to be same. We have the same DNA. Where do we begin to start that battle? That conversion is a sin against God's original intent. Sanjay Dixit could have been Joseph, Pandit Sharma could have been Suleiman, and Sankrant Sanu could have been Shumpita. But we are not. We are born in a particular system. Why is conversion? How do we resist that?
The logic doesn't work with the Abrahamic faiths because their
We have to demolish
epistemology
that logic
consists
then.
of
That's what I'm saying. That
their
logic can be demolished.
epistemology. If you've
Please.
read my booklet,
Yes.
their epistemology consists of only Shabda Praman, that is their book. Whatever is there in their book is correct. Whatever is not there in the book or is opposed by the book is incorrect. That's very simple logic. That's what we call the binary logic. and we have multi-valued logic. So on the plane of logic as well as on the concept of time, we differ. So let's not try to beat them with this kind of logic. Let's
So
try
I
to beat
often,
them by our kind of logic.
so I often ask in interfaith settings whether the room is full of reasonable people, and those who are unreasonable, can they please put their hands up? And of course, everybody says, I'm reasonable. And then I say, okay, so that means you're able to reason. Can you tell me under what circumstances would a reasonable person use reason to decide to be unreasonable and to abandon reason completely? How does that work? And that's where they get stuck. Because there is a leap, isn't there? You have to abandon reason and say, yes, I will happily accept as reality something which makes no sense to me. I've got no evidence for it, and I'm still a reasonable person. This is a dharma sankat at the heart of their being. And I think with dharma sankats like this, if we can bring them to their attention, sooner or later, the chakravyu gets broken. And they will find themselves increasingly confined in a space which is diminishing. And this is what's happening. They have tried to, as Sankrantji said so eloquently, they try to reinforce it every week because asatya, that which is unreal, it needs to be driven home week in, week out, because it'll take 7 days, it'll take 6 days, and on the seventh day, suddenly the mental kittens are coming out from underneath the tokri and saying, no, we don't like it here, we've got to get out of this place, it's crazy. And so it has to be reinforced. But those who are genuinely reasonable, and they say, I want to use reason to navigate every space and not abandon it, then they become tranquil, and then the truth of their being becomes more apparent to them. We have got the clue to what is at the center of every human being's universe. We know what each human being is. And once we can bring their attention back to who they are, away from what happened 2,000 years ago, away from what happened 1,400 years ago, and back to who they are at this moment in time, then all of a sudden, good things start to happen. They become more human again and less conditioned and programmed and less driven. And that's the key to this, Sanjay. Every single human being wants to know who they are, why they're here, what they are, what their purpose is, and how can they be, as Sankranti says, happier.
All right. So can we have got only one question today. Okay, there's more coming. So let's start with the questions. Before that, I urge everybody to not just like the video, share it around, and subscribe to our channel, Jaipur Dialogues, but also to subscribe to Jaipur Dialogues USA and the Jaipur Dialogues Vimarsh. Okay, let's have the questions. निखिल रोहिला, श्राद्ध के समय हम अपने देवी पितरों की पूजा अर्चना करते हैं, लेकिन मृत्यु के बाद आत्मन ब्राह्मण से मिलकर एक हो जाती है, ब्रह्म से मिलकर एक हो जाती है, तो हम उनकी वंदना पृथक रूप में कैसे करते हैं? Yes, gentlemen.
Wonderful question. 2 dimensions. Firstly, Atma has no color, has no individuality. It's like a spark of light inside each of us. So when Atma goes from form to form, it is pure. So what is it that transfers from generation to generation, from parent to child? It is this individual identity, which is a part of us. Prarabdha karam are actually nothing other than the karam that have come through to us from us as an individual, but also from the parents who created this body. And so our parents and their actions, their tensions, their happiness, their fears have some imprint in the body in which we occupy. And so what better way of doing puja and worship to try and make those imprints calm, to negate those impressions that are from past incarnations and also past generations. If we reconcile our relationship with people who are no longer with us, then we become tranquil and they become released as well.
Okay. Next question, Vibhuti Ji.
Korti is asking the question. The real Hindu god is Brahman, which is morphogenetic, field of consciousness. which is empty space in atoms at micro level, and everything in this world comes out of it if we talk at macro level. Sankrantji?
Well, I think it's a statement more than a question, but definitely, this is my argument with the other side, which is the atheist side of it, which we haven't really taken up today, which is from the Hindu tradition point of view and from reality, everything emerges out of consciousness. So the substratum is consciousness, and everything emerges out of consciousness. Whereas the atheist viewpoint of view is that everything is material, and consciousness is an emergent property of matter. Yeah, which, if you think about it, is completely absurd, to have consciousness being an emergent property of matter. So I think it's a different debate. I don't want to get into it too deep, but we'd love to have it at some other point.
I think the answer to that is yes.
Right. Humpty, sir, how can exactly Sanatan Dharma play a role to liberate the minds of those who are instilled with fear of God? Well, there are three basics, we call the rights of Allah. You must read Maududi's tafsir to know that. The three rights of Allah. That he has to be feared, and everybody has to be a slave to him, and also there cannot be any partner to him, any worship. So these are the three basics. Anyway, you enunciated one of them. With fear of God, they believe to stay inside the well rather than jumping out. Fear gives security. Panditji?
Ours is the only tradition which can actually get rid of all fears. And that happens at moments when you glimpse that you are more than just a material flesh suit body. When you've had a glimpse that you might be something more than that, then the fear of dying and the fear of injury disappears, and then all of a sudden you find that actually there are no other fears left. All fears tend to be centered around our bodily identification. Ours is the only tradition which can take you beyond bodily identification. And that's the journey that we have to take. And anybody who is so fearful, if you do some sort of a mantra jap, find a guru, do the Mahamrityunjay jap, and find out what it is to transcend an understanding of death and the process of dying, you'll be amazed at how much information and knowledge starts to come to you about the mechanics of living and how the body then deconstructs itself and dissolves itself. And at one point in time, you will suddenly wake up to the notion that I'm not a flesh suit, that I am Atma, I am consciousness, I am awareness, I am spirit. And when that happens, all fears disappear. And so I think Sanatan Dharma is the only route to becoming truly fearless within this existence.
Just a passing question. I think both Sankrant and Panditji can address this. The all-powerful Almighty sitting in the seventh heaven, once he has consigned everybody and allotted heaven and hell, is it possible for him to interchange people from heaven to hell, hell to heaven? And if not, then what is the almighty thing about it?
Well, I think this goes into the whole, they have this whole theology about choice and free choice and all of that. Don't really want to get into it. I think there's a simpler way to do khandan of this whole notion of unlimited time in heaven or hell, which is, if you look at a human life and you divide it by infinity, right? I actually called. I was driving up on the highway in the U.S. one time with my son, and we saw this big billboard. Do you know Jesus? Call 1-800. Know Jesus, or whatever it was. And so I told my son, let's make a call. We were killing time on the highway. We had some time to kill. He said, okay, let's make a call. I wanted him to hear in also. So made a call, call the number, and the person picks up. And I said, okay, so you're going to save me, save my soul, so I'm going to go into heaven. Like, yes, Jesus is the way. So I say, okay, tell me this: what is the human lifespan divided by infinity or divided by eternity? Forget eternity. Let's say 1 trillion years. I'll shorten eternity to 1 trillion years. Now divide the human lifetime by 1 trillion years, and it's a very, very small number. It's almost like the blink of an eye. So why is it that your compassionate God decides the fate of human beings in the blink of an eye, and forever after this blink of an eye is passed, consigns them into this heaven or hell bucket? This doesn't seem either fair or reasonable or compassionate. And the person who was trained to be a polemicist and an apologist had no answer. It's like, oh yes, some questions are very difficult and too mysterious. Too mysterious. We don't know the mysteries of God.
That's right. That's right.
Naturally, they are tuned to only 6,006 years.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a very, very limited notion of time. You have a very limited notion of, and this whole notion of eternity, again, these are just kind of absurd ideas that they keep repeating. It makes no sense, but that's just the way it is.
Okay. Next question.
Korti again. Sir, our souls are part of a Brahman, albeit at lower frequency level due to karmic baggage. Before this human life, we have been through every life form, from a microorganism to an intelligent mammal. The last stage of a soul's journey is human life after that moksha. So I think you're making a statement. If you want to comment on it, you are most welcome to either of you. But I will go back to the previous one. Sankrantji said about heaven and hell. That was a great thing you did, calling that 800 number. I'm thinking of recommending $100 budget for Carnegie Foundation and Equality Labs to produce a survey of experiences of heaven and hell. let's get that also going in sense. That's when you begin to question the fundamentals. That's what I was talking about. Next question, please. Sanjay ji, आप पूछेंगे या मैं पूछ दूं?
आप ही है.
Okay,
You are on
Dinkar ji
screen.
is asking, unlike the left wing who blindly support their sides of governments, the right wing is jumping up and down and is criticizing Modi government like no one. Should you not have patience? 7 years are not enough to fix the civilization when the invasions happened for the hundreds of years. Sharma ji?
Well, I empathise with the person who has asked this question. It's been a tussle for all of us. Firstly, we do not have a left wing and a right wing. Okay, we have a confused wing and a dharmic wing, and we have an emerging, still pretty confused dharmic wing itself. And the Indic wing is finding its own ground, it's finding its own stability. It's learning to become civilizationally muscular. And for a long period of time, the Indic wing has actually been, I would say, not only imprisoned, but it's also been anemic and has been in a state of chronic depression. It's wrong to say that we have a left wing and a right wing. So having said that, I do also acknowledge that the Modi government has to follow the rule of law. Now, the laws that we have are laws that were intended to diminish the Hindu family. They were laws that were intended to deplete our resources, to diminish our self-esteem, to continuously humiliate us, and those laws are still in place. And so for the government to do a legal act, it can't help but harm our community. This is, I think, the sankat that they are in. They can't abandon the rule of law, and it's taking a long time to change law. That's the principle and the theory. But I have to also note that every Indian citizen has the right to expect safety and the protection of the state. And when I hear that the Palghar sadhus still haven't got justice, to my mind, that there are so many karyakartas who are Indic and they are being killed and worse, and they still haven't got justice, I think it's wrong of the government not to apply the responsibilities to all citizens equally. Referring to Nupur Sharma's case, okay, I can understand that in terms of management of politics and government, the manner in which she spoke may not have been as wise as it perhaps could have been, and it wasn't timely. because when you say something, what you say, how you say it, and where you say it are all fundamental planks of diplomacy and governance. But having said that, the government should have been robust in saying that anybody who is asking Santan se juda, Sartan se juda, and making statements like that, they should receive the full attention of the law, and the law should be applied without discrimination to them as well. And yet it hasn't. So those are questions which I think all of us are asking. There may be infrastructural and systemic reasons why they've not been able to act for the Sanatani community, and we give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm a great believer that whoever's in governance, you have to encourage, engage, and support, and whoever's in opposition, you have to beat them up to make them stronger and better able to fulfill their role. And so I share some of the concerns, but I agree, 7 years are not enough to fix 1400 years of enslavery, and certainly 300 years of institutionalized anti-Hindu, anti-Indian sentiment, which is in law.
Well, I think Sankrantji initially he talked a lot about it, how the state is anti-Hindu in a sense. The problem is that the present government uh, doesn't seem to have a, not only doesn't have a clue, but doesn't want to learn, and has shown absolutely no inclination to correct the wrongs. Forget correcting the wrongs, has shown no inclination to call the wrongs as wrongs. So that is where we will, because we supported them not just for the sake of roads and beautiful, what is called 5G and 6G, but everybody supported them. Large number, I think, most of the people whom they like to call the fringe today, they supported them because they were sick of the civilizational attacks on their very existence. And unfortunately, the Modi government has shown no spine for it. In fact, the what has happened in Jammu and Kashmir after the most elevating, you can say, removal or nullification of the Article 370 is actually a case in point. Next. Once a Sanatan Dharma in present form is corrupted, Tulsidas, Surdas, all these guys never existed. Oh, that's
The entire
that's very, very, I should say, earth-shaking statement. The entire Bhakti movement is fake, cooked up by British. Mindless dancing on streets like idiot is not Sanatan Dharma. Anyway, Rohan, I think I'll let it pass because you seem to be making statements that actually fly in the face of facts. So and we are already past the 1 hour mark, so I just let it pass. I will not bother answering it. Rohan Shah, NRI in Dallas, Texas. How I can set up or be part of a group that gathers funds and helps civilizational causes like fight legal cases, lobby with American politicians, businesses, etc. Are there such groups already available? Okay, we all have groups.
yes.
Jaipur Dialogues, for instance, is one. And you can help Sankrant Sanu ramp up the Garuda books, or you can help Pandit Satish Sharma. All of us can do with that.
And in the US itself, there are
Yeah.
Hindu American Foundation, Kona. Get in touch with me, Rohan. I'll definitely help you with that.
Yeah, support Vibhuti Ji also. We need more
Absolutely.
Hindu-minded politicians, to take public office in the US, because even there's a huge lobby that is de-Hinduizing Hindus and Indians that are actually running for public office by attacking anybody who speaks up for the Dharma. So I think it's very important that people like Vibhuti and others get a
Thank
chance
you.
to on
Thank you.
this.
Yeah, volunteer to support Vibhuti Ji as he runs for office. It will be a dramatic shift. So every single bit of help
Thank you.
and money is welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ron, you can get in touch with me. I will request Jaipur Dialogue to give him my number or email. Okay, he can
Sure,
reach out to me.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Next.
Abhishek is asking, I agree with everything spoken here. My question here is, where does India have the financial wherewithal to bring these changes? For example, small baby step like UCC will have repercussions from West and minorities we can't handle. So isn't the quest for economy to reach a level before civilizational revivalism is preferable?
Let me
Sankrantji?
take that actually.
Yes.
Is the
If
chicken and egg story?
yeah, the biggest, this is the biggest fallacy that we have. I mean, it does, frankly, Pakistan is better at the narrative war than India is. We are simply so clueless about how to put forth our story. Like, why would the West be opposed to UCC? The West has UCC everywhere. UCC is the standard. In the US, you cannot have, Muslims cannot marry four wives in the US. They'll be put behind bars, right? Why is it that we have no spokespeople who can articulate our stand clearly in a way that is understood, right? And instead we have this kind of diffident thing. Oh, no, 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 what will happen if we do this? What will happen if we do that? I mean, the we even, the same thing happened with this abominably named Citizenship Amendment Act. Why call it a Citizenship Amendment Act? You know, you should have called it, support for persecuted refugees act.
No, that is
Which is what it is,
that is
right?
technical.
So
That is technical because there is a Citizenship Act.
no,
So
no,
your
that is
amendment
fine.
will be
That is
called
fine, but
Citizenship.
you
Amendment
have,
is in brackets.
no, that is fine, but you do not have to. How does the government position something? How does the government name something, right? We have to become much smarter at, then there is a narrative war going on, and we are sitting ducks in the narrative war, because firstly we don't even understand there's a narrative war, right? And secondly, we have no clue on how to go about fighting the narrative war in a way which makes our position understandable. So absolutely, there's no problem with UCC. There's nothing about quote minorities. This is exactly how minorities are treating all over the West, but somehow we think this is a big deal. So we have to really be able to articulate our position clearly and also create an ecosystem. The government is absolutely not interested in funding, creating, helping an ecosystem of voices of intellectuals across the world that will be able to articulate its very reasonable positions, right? To its credit, I think the government has actually done a fairly good job in diplomacy, in interstate diplomacy, in interstate relations. I think the Indian government and the BJP government has done a good job. But in going outside of the diplomatic channels to reach out to the general public, to manage media, to manage academia, all of those things, I think it has failed abysmally at, in both in India and abroad, especially abroad. So that's a whole other discussion, but it's important that we do not start from a position of being diffident and of being constantly apologizing for things that are very reasonable to begin with.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, colonization created a global power structure which is Anglophile. Even in the European Parliament, the conversations, the root base language is English. And we have not yet mastered the simple fact, the simple process that before you take an action, you first set the perception. You have to manage the perceptions before you go ahead. You have to say that Saddam Hussein is killing babies before you go in and steal their gold and oil. And then afterwards, you have to manage the perception to hide what it is you've done. It's a three-stage process. Manage the perception, commit the act, and then afterwards manage the perception. In Bharat, we don't do number one. On occasion, we do number two, and we do it fairly well. And the acts that have all been, the attempt has been made, they have not had, uh, internally, they're actually very good for the nation, good for equality and everything else. But the perception has not been managed either before nor afterwards. And what Sankrantji has said is absolutely true. The management of a diaspora, which is its biggest asset, to be able to participate in the creation of these narratives, that has sadly been very, very poor. Hopefully that'll change, because without an official or an unofficial Ministry of Information, very few regimes withstand the test of time and pressure.
Right. Next one. T. Devil, while India got its independence in 1947, Hindus never did and lost a big part of land belonging to their civilization. Complex exchange of population was the only solution. Now the virus is too deep. Just look at RSS. Okay, that's a comment, so we'll just take it at that. Oneness, the Muslims say that they don't believe in idol worship, but then they have the Kaaba, then also pictures hanging on the wall of same in the Kalma. Is this not idol worship? Technically, yes. Yes, technically, yes. But then there are excuses too.
Yeah, I've
Next.
written an article. It's called "Murti Puja is the antidote to fundamentalism." Um, so, so the in fact, if you make it broader, the mind always creates idols. If you don't think it's an idol, why don't you burn this pulp and ink, which constitute a book, and you should be able to burn it because it's after all only wood pulp and ink. Why don't you have a public burning? Right? You cannot do it because it's your idol, right? Just because you claim you do not worship it, and this notion of worship is also something to be questioned from the Christian theology point of view. Worship is reserved for the true God. The question is, what is worship? We don't even have the same concept of worship. We say pujaniya. Whatever we respect is pujaniya. So we have a notion of respect. Anything that we respect is pujaniya. So for any human being, somebody doesn't want their car to get a ding, so they're doing worship to their car. It doesn't matter if they put it on a pedestal and create an idol of it or not. So the human mind has all kinds of idols that it's stuck in, and the Hindu tradition recognizes this. It is one of the few traditions that recognizes that the human mind gets attached to form, and therefore it gives and allows forms as pathways by which you can access higher energies and get an access into it. And it's a very mature way to go about it versus other things that are basically ranting against it. But the human minds, they can't get away from you know fanning their book, or getting upset because somebody tore a page of it and writing about it, because they're so attached to wood pulp and ink. So it's all idols. And to go beyond idols, you have to go to Advaita, which is far cry.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Since you talked about it, I'll just give you the statement that Bhagavan Krishna makes in the Gita. He said, Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram vinashyatsu avinashyantam yah pashyati sa pashyati. Okay, that's okay. Everything is one. All are equal. And the Ishwar is manifest equally in everyone. All that. But in Bhagavatam, this is just makes a what is called a qualification. Says yavat sarveshu bhuteshu madbhavo nopajayate. That is, until you are able to see me as one in all the beings. Tavadevam upasita mang manah kaya vrittaviha. Till that time, you can keep worshipping me in certain forms. So, I think that is what Sankrant was referring to.
Absolutely.
Next.
If I can just add one thing on that, we're the victims of a straw man argument about all of our murtis and vigrahas. A straw man has been created in the minds of so many people, which has nothing to do with what murti puja and vigraha puja is. I sometimes say to people that in the same way that a sutra is a tiny collection, but if you are introduced to a sutra and it's expanded in front of you and explained in much more detail, suddenly Patanjali's Yoga Sutra encompass a whole human existence beyond multiple lifetimes. And a vigraha is the same. It can be unlocked. It is a teaching. It is a relationship with a body of knowledge and experience. It's all waiting for a person to engage with it in the right frame of mind. Now, isn't that the most amazing way of teaching and of preserving knowledge? A visual sutra is just an extraordinarily subtle and sophisticated way of communicating understanding and evolutionary experience across generations. It's a masterful, masterful creation. And yet it's been diminished and reduced by those who don't have the subtlety of perception into something they nonsensically call idol worship, which is the ultimate religious straw man. And we've not yet been able to dissolve that straw man.
Totally.
Right. Okay. Next.
Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. SDG, in my opinion, language is the best tool at our disposal to fix Sanatan civilization. Should we not make Sanskrit compulsory in schools? Sanjay, it's your
Anything
question.
that you make compulsory, people will end up rejecting it. So it's better you make it so attractive that people naturally go to it. And in fact, I find there's a lot of interest among people to learn Sanskrit, and a lot of people are coming back to me that when I recommended Sanskrit Bharati initial courses, familiarization courses, people are coming back and saying, "Oh, I have completed this. Now I'm going to the next level." So that is how it connects. And especially when you tell everybody that if you want to make your child a genius, teach him yoga and teach him Sanskrit. He will become a genius, guaranteed.
Yeah, and
Next.
Check
also
back,
the
check back with me after 25 years.
the the language issue is big issue, and it's not only Sanskrit but really all our Indian languages where we have given up on higher education, on engineering, on medicine, and all of this being only available in English, which is really holding back our civilization. No other civilization in the world is doing that. So and there is the book I'd written called The English Medium Myth, but I mean I think it's a longer debate that Sanjay ji and I have had before on this channel as well.
Yes, we have had, and of course, there are some fleeting noises being made, but we don't know how far it will be
How
implemented
is
in
this
any.
going to actually come up? Yes.
So we have to wait and watch. Next.
Next question, Jahangir Gotla. The government doesn't want to fix anything. Everything comes down to perception. Judiciary appears to educate differently for same crimes. This question, Satishji
No, I
or
think we
Sanjayji?
were talking about fixing the Sanatan civilization, not by the government.
Yeah, it's for us. Individual action is required in this situation. Yes,
Well,
Right.
we as a
Yeah,
society, we as a
yeah,
society. Yeah.
yes.
I totally agree. As I said, we've inherited the most horrific, the most oppressive systems of state that were created to oppress us. And so the government will follow where the population want to lead them. We have to empower them to make the most dramatic changes. We've given them the mandate, but we haven't yet given them the voice. We haven't yet given them the momentum. We haven't yet given them the pran shakti to be as courageous in doing these things as they were with 370. So it is, each and every one of us has a role to play. And I also remember from the Kashmir files, there was that statement, wasn't there, where she said, Sarkar to unki hai, lekin system to hamara hai.
Yes.
And the Sarkar is engaged in a very difficult task, which is to cleanse this system. But each of us is engaged in the same task. We are engaging with this system, and we can do an awful lot. If you want to help stabilize and purify the judiciary, file FIRs for every single Hindu phobic, anti Indian, anti national event that occurs. Let's sort out the. It's almost like flushing a constipated waste system, isn't it? The more pressure we put into it, the sooner the blockages will be flushed out.
Do you
Quite
think
right.
the constipated are feeling very blocked and we are pushed to reject?
Yeah, what we need is more civilizational trifle, isn't it?
Right.
Next.
Robert Cool is asking, Namaste. Would more works like Krishna, Yogeshwara, or Sanjayji help that demystify our Puranas and get to the essence of them? Sanjayji, you alone can answer that question.
Oh, yes, of course. The Krishna Yogeshwar actually that I, because I believe that there are a number of planes to our consciousness. I I wrote Krishna Yogeshwar, and I call it that I have intellectualized the Krishna story. So I have brought it down to the level of the intellect. Otherwise, of course, you can look at the Krishna story from a number of points. From at the consciousness level, it is very different. I think Rajneesh has written a most beautiful explanation of that, Acharya Rajneesh. So it is actually bringing it down to the intellectual level. So that is why it appeals to the rational mind. And of course, you can call it demystification. You can explain it rationally to people. That is why it was devised that way. And of course, it has a whole what is called a character called Kutil Muni. So and Jatil Muni, and now the final one in this trilogy, which I'll wait because I'm still polishing that whole idea. That will probably be uh, even more interesting.
Oneness. Sirs, how is it going to be possible to have Swami Vivekananda be taught in schools and not just Shakespeare? Swamiji is the pride of India. His works have never been taken to the youth, but we have Shakespeare. Sankrantaji,
That's
Panditji, both of
Sankrant's
you.
question is maybe.
Well, I think the how is it possible? There are two ways for anything to be possible. One is that we lobby and influence the government, and the other is we do take on our own private initiatives. So what we have done specifically in Garuda, and the reason we started Garuda Prakashan Garuda books is so that we can create a library of scholarship which is rooted in the Indian traditions, which is telling the story about the Indian traditions. We have books like Saffron Swords, which is telling about all the resistance that we put up to invaders, because the history we are taught is invaders came, they beat us up, they ruled us, and we were just passive and we kept getting defeated. This is not true. There's so many heroes that came, they emerged, they fought, they defeated, we won so many battles, and even if that rule was always challenged, and it was never just a washover. So similarly, we are bringing up a book on the history of mathematics and how Hindu mathematics changed the world. So what we need to do is, a lot of the material is available. Why don't you buy a set of books and go to your child's school and gift it to them? Gift it to as return gifts to everybody who's coming to your son's birthday party or your daughter's birthday party. So there's so many things that we can do, without waiting for the government. Of course, the government has a lot of role to play because so much of education is controlled by it, and we need to continue to lobby the government and continue to put pressure on the government to make changes. But in the meantime, do what you can. Sanjay ji has created Jaipur Dialogues. Sharma ji has written a wonderful book on caste, and Garuda Books is constantly bringing out great authors, new authors, to platform them. So become part of the movement. See how you can help, and let's all do it together.
And there's a great opportunity for creativity and humor. I mean, Shakespeare's not all bad. There's that scene where Romeo, for the first time, sees Juliet on the balcony, and he says, "What light through yonder window breaks?" Somebody should put in there, "'Tis Bharat, and Dharm Vidya is the sun." Right? Sorry, Sanjay, you were drinking when I made that joke. But there is such a
Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Is it?
yeah, why not? Why not? There is scope for such mischief and such creativity using what we know about both cultures, but we're just not engaging in it. And I think we need more people to realize that there is great anand in such mischief as well.
Good one.
Samir Mohapatra, Pranam. It is a sorry indictment of education system that the only way we consume information is by intellectualizing it in tangible terms. Our worldview is greatly shaped by what's outside, not what's within. How can we alter it? I would leave it to either one of you to take it up.
So I often have this question, and I always give the same answer, that sadhana is the evolution of who you are, and sadhana can be done by engaging with the outside world because it's you who's engaging. And the more you introduce dharma into the outside world, the stronger the mechanisms for dharma vidya internally they also become. So this we have a little bit of what sattvic ahankar, that the inner journey is the wonderful crown of our experience, but the outer journey is somehow less. And that's not true. They are supportive of each other, they interact with each other, they suffuse each other, and they are dependent and reliant upon each other. Without an external existence which is supportive of dharma and evolution, the inner journey cannot happen. The outside world is what supports a healthy body and gives us the opportunity to engage in purifying the intellect. It's the outside world that gives us the capacity to do all these things. And so it shouldn't be diminished. And yeah, anybody who is engaged in grihastha knows that the highest of all sadhanas is actually grihastha ashram.
Next. Okay, so we've come to the end of this session. Thank you all very much. A long, engaging session, but very much worth it. Thank you, Sankrant ji. Thank you, Pandit Satish Sharma ji. Thank you, Vibhuti ji. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Jai Hind, Vande Mataram. Thank you.
Vande Matram. Har Har Mahadev.
Har Har Mahadev.
Jai
Har
Sri Ram.
Har Mahadev.
Jai Shri Ram.